Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today I'm going to look at a few cards that I think should have been introduced within the Duel Links new mini box, because I consider them to be very important to the Valkyrie archetype, and actually by not having them I think it prevents them from being as powerful as they could be. So today I'll be covering the Goddess cards. These are the three cards which help to banish cards and help to determine supporting your Valkyrie monsters to boost their attack points up, and to also remove any threats your opponent may have. The first card is Goddess Skull's Oracle. It's a continuous spell card with the effect when this card is activated. If all monsters you control are Valkyrie monsters, minimum 1, you can add 1 Goddess Vedande's Guidance from your deck to your hand. Once per turn during your main phase, you can look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, and if you do, place them on top of their deck in any order, but you cannot normal summon or special summon monsters for the rest of this turn, except fairy monsters. You can only activate 1 Goddess Skull's Oracle once per turn. So I think this card is necessary for the deck. For starters, it does require you to have at least a Valkyrie, and they can only be Valkyries on your field to get the searching effect. These are necessary because you need the other cards in order to have the full effect. But even as a standalone card, this is able to you're able to top deck what your opponent is going to have. Depending on how you know what they're doing, you can determine cards which at the time could be useless for them. So you can top deck something that, is going to cause them a problem, or an attributing monster that they can't get out immediately. It also gives you a little bit of knowledge, as you are the one who looks at those 3 cards. So you can get a feel for what they're doing. Even though, some of the cards might be quite generic, so you might have your Karma card, you might have other cards such as, Double Cyclone, or various other removal cards within the deck. You will, chances are, see at least 1 card which gives you an archetypal hint, in which case you're able to make a decision on that, and then that knowledge you're able to actually set up a little bit better. Of the 3, I consider this to be the most useful, for the simple part is it can be used independently of the other 3, and its ability just gives you that much more detail and insight. I would only say the real downside of this effect is that if you draw the other cards, if they end up in your hand, then you can't search for them unless you're planning to run maybe 2 copies of them. But then again, within a Duel Links deck, you have a maximum amount of 30 cards, and you really don't want to be drawing into multiple of these cards at any time, so it's advisable to maybe keep 2 of these and maybe 1 of each of the others. Although saying that, yugioh does have the ability to recover your continuous spell cards every time it goes into battle, so that's one way of kind of recycling them. Another way is also, I think it's the Despair Uranus is able to actually protect your back row continuous spell and traps. So if you manage to get all 3 on and you're actually able to summon this Despair Uranus, then you're able to protect it through that. The other disadvantage, but this isn't much of one, is that you're limited to normal and special summoning fairy-type monsters for the rest of the turn. But then again, the Valkyrie monsters are all fairy types. The next card we have is Goddess Vedande's Guidance. This is a continuous spell card with the effect, when this card is activated, if all monsters you control are Valkyrie monsters, minimum 1, you can add 1 Goddess Erd's Verdict from your deck to your hand. Once per turn, you can declare 1 type of card, monster, spell, or trap, reveal the top card of your opponent's deck, and if it was the declared type, they set it to their field, otherwise they add it to their hand. You can only activate 1 Goddess Vedande's Guidance per turn. So this actually helps to manipulate what your opponent is summoning or playing. Essentially, this card is a little bit of a guessing game, unlike the original Skuld, which is able to give you some knowledge of their deck by stacking it as you see fit. This one requires you to guess whether it's a monster, spell, or trap. The advantage of that is people tend to play more monsters than either of the other two. So even if you don't have Skuld's effect, using this guessing monster more likely than not will give you some kind of, statistically you'll be a little bit more in favour. In which case they are then set to the field. The disadvantage is if you guess wrong, it adds to their hand, so they get advantage of it. So having that deck knowledge is always better. The first part of the effect is basically the same as the other one with Skuld, and that you need a Valkyrie monster, and it can only be Valkyrie monsters in order to search for the final piece of the puzzle. But I don't see this as that big of an issue, as you'll be running near enough pure cards anyway. It's not a big deal. But if you can get Skuld first, it guarantees you know what's coming next. And of course, you've got the final card, which is Goddess Erd's Verdict. This is a continuous spell card with the effect, your opponent cannot target Valkyrie monsters you control with card effects. Also, they can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Once per turn, you can declare one card name, then target one set card your opponent controls, reveal the set card, and if it was the declared card, banish it. Otherwise, banish one card you control. This, out of the three cards, is the worst to directly draw into. If you don't have knowledge of what your opponent is playing, it's a straight through guessing game. Even if you do know what they're playing, say they're playing Elemental Heroes, who's to say you know exactly what they've got? This is the biggest issue with this card, because if you draw into any of the three out of order, this has the worst statistical luck because you have to give an exact name. With the previous version, you need to give a card type. You've got a 1 in 3 chance, probably higher with Monster, and obviously if you've got Skuld's knowledge by stacking the deck, you are then able to determine everything. I would say the benefit that this card has over the other two is that the other two's purpose is really to search into the next card along the pattern. This card has nothing else to search into because this is the final card, the most powerful of the cards and the highest risk card. That means that provided it needed something else to make it stand out from the other two cards. That's to give it all Valkyrie monsters you control, protection from card effects, from targeting, and destruction. By having this effect in there, it actually makes it a lot more powerful. The downside, of course, is if you guess wrong, which you shouldn't if you've got the other two cards. Well, you can't really if you've got the other two cards. You have to banish one card you control. That is a problem. The Valkyrie monsters themselves gain stat boosts. Some of them gain stat boosts based on the cards that are banished on your opponents, from your opponent, but not from you. This is very much a double-edged sword, and it's not even worth playing if you draw into it without the other two. Just that's my opinion, and you can ask anyone else, they will probably tell you the same thing. Now, the reason I think they decided not to introduce this within Duel Links is I can only really think of one reason. Because the Duel Links system only allows you 3 zones in your spell and trap zone, if you were to run one of each, it blocks your entire spell and trap zone. I don't think people will be playing it. Although saying that, these cards are necessary to get the full effect off between the Valkyries and the Goddess cards. I've substituted, just as a way of dealing with it, these cards with a very old card called Soul Release, which is able to just banish cards from yours and your opponent's graveyards, which is beneficial because if they've got 5 cards, and even if there's a couple of spell and traps in there, you've got the flexibility to do that. Alternatively, if they've got several monsters with maybe graveyard effects, and you've got a couple of cards in your graveyard, you can banish a mixture of both, which means at least you're preventing them from getting any sort of graveyard effect off. I really love these cards, and I am so disappointed that there was a competition that's recently been introduced within by Konami to like an archetype battle. They went up against the Insectors. Originally, they had won the voting poll, but it was found that by using Twitter, that people were able to buy votes through that. As a result, Konami actually scrapped the competition for it, and actually had to restart and used a surveying system which was safer. When they redid that, the votes went the other way. It completely reversed. Because there are still a couple of cards that Siegfried used within. I can't remember. I think it was the fourth season of Yu-Gi-Oh! The original series. I know there was Nibelung's Ring, which actually was another of those control-based cards, which I would have loved to have seen introduced within the anime. And I'm only hoping that there will be some support and some anime-based support somewhere down the line for the rest of those cards. I can only hope. What do you think of these three cards? Did you think they were missing from Arena of Sanctuary, which is the name of the newest mini-box from Duel Links? Or do you think, they just weren't going to be fitted in within the deck at all? Whatever you think, leave your comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe.